So welcome to everyone. As I say, especially welcome to new people. Really good to have anyone that's new or new to these seminars. What we're doing with the nature of mind, we're exploring the nature of mind from a whole range of perspectives, from neuroscience to psychology to past life memories to near-death experiences. And tonight we're going to be particularly exploring the work of Amishi, who is a neuroscientist, and is she?
She is,
yes. Yeah. I will introduce her. And we're going to be Amalavajra did the conversation with Amishi, so I'm going to be particularly asking him questions about what she thinks, what she feels, and then we're going to watch, at some point we'll watch a clip from their conversation. We'll also have the obligatory short tea break. We're going to what are we going to do?
We're going to review the nature of mind.
We're going to review the programme a bit and introduce Vajra Devi to you, who's going to be leading the meditations next week, our final week of online meditations. But yeah, let's start with.
Oh, there's a question. We're going to have Q&A as well, aren't we?
Oh yeah, we're going to have questions and answers. Yeah, that's true. There's always that. So there'll be a chance to ask questions. We'll be hearing from in the second half more about the highlights from the session.
Yeah.
So this is Amalavajra. Amalavajra and I have been very good friends for a long, long time, since you were a boy. Nearly, 20. So Amalavajra, when did you interview her? I can't remember now.
It was a couple of months ago. Yeah.
So for you, do watch the interview, but obviously not now. But we'll be if we can post a link to to our conversation, that'd be great. So what we're going to do today is just hear a little bit about the kind of areas that you were exploring, and then do go back and, if you haven't watched it already, do go back and watch the interview.
Yeah.
So I thought we'd start with just me sort of basically asking you what. Here we go. We've got the book here.
Yes.
Peak Mind. Can you see it? There you go. She was very, very engaging. Very, very engaging. Really lovely woman. So I thought we'd just start with getting you to say something about her core idea. What you found were her core ideas.
Yes. I mean, the subtitle of the book is 12. I mean, this is, I'm sure, for publicity purposes, but was Peak Mind, 12 minutes a day to find your focus, meet the challenge, and be fully present when it matters most. Find your focus, meet the challenge, and be fully present when it matters most. So what she's particularly interested in is how to, in a way, not try and escape life's challenges and find a bit of me time. That's definitely not her approach. It's life is inevitably challenging. How do we live that life, but in a way that is likely to be more, if you like, fruitful? We're going to be able to sustain ourselves, sustain our awareness, our attention systems, as she calls them. I'll explain what she means by attention systems. So that actually, as she says, we can meet that challenge, not shirk it. As we know, very few people actually want to go and live in the mountains and be a hermit. All of us have sort of engaged, energetic lives. How do we live that life whilst also being, in a sense, operating at a peak level of awareness? So I think that's her main thinking. She's very pragmatic. She's not a philosopher. She's not, in a way, she's not particularly speculative about the nature of the brain. Most of her work is based on large-scale studies with people living very demanding lives, particularly soldiers. What she calls, in America, they call first responders, so paramedics and firefighters and that sort of thing. And she's been studying the effect of meditation and mindfulness on them and on their effectiveness. Not just, their happiness, but also their effectiveness.
We also had asked her a little bit of question about being, mindfulness for soldiers, didn't you?
Yes, I did. Yes.
That in as well, because for some people that'd be like, hang on, that is our fear, that we're teaching mindfulness to.
Of helping soldiers kill people.
Yeah.
Shall I answer that question?
Yeah, why don't you? Because I hadn't meant to ask you. But.
No, I appreciate that's an obvious question, and of course I did ask her. Yeah, actually, I thought her answer was very good.
Yeah.
She said, I don't know whether to talk to you or to the camera. Talk to you.
I'm listening.
Yeah, she said, yeah, she was interesting. She said, yeah, look, of course, she doesn't want to promote violence. She said she'd been born in Ahmedabad, which is where Gandhi had one of his main ashram, and sort of non-violence or ahimsa was very much part of her upbringing. So it's certainly not that she wants to promote violence. At the same time, this is a world with warfare. It is a world with armies, and her strong point to me was, well, she's talking to 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds who've got a weapon that can destroy a whole town. Would we rather that 18-year-old is a bit self-aware, is calm, is kind of, in a way emotionally regulated when they're operating that weapon or not? And of course, the answer is we'd much rather that. She even said, maybe one could ask more about it, she even said that, that the soldiers really kind of really valued this on a sort of human level. It actually made them have more empathy for their opponents. I'm not quite sure how that works out when the general really does say pull the trigger, but anyway. And she said in another interview that what we would talk about as loving kindness meditations were their favourite meditations.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that was easily the favourite one. So really surprising in that regard. But guess what? Soldiers are human beings just like us, and they, of course, want to feel connected to other living beings. So yeah, so quite an interesting answer I thought from her on that.
I mean, she tells a lovely story about it. We won't do it now because of all the take of time, but do have a look at it. She tells a very touching story about a particular soldier who, through mindfulness, actually managed to avert horrors rather than cause more.
Saved a lot of lives.
Saved a lot. So I was very struck.
Yeah.
I thought her answer was actually very intelligent. Anyway, we may not go on to that too long, but I thought for some people that might be a stumbling block right from the beginning. So let's, she talks about these, three attention systems.
Yeah.
So it'd be good to sort of know what is an attention system, and then what are those three, and then what value is that for us in a way?
Yeah, I mean, it's a funny old phrase, isn't it? Attention system. I mean, basically, I think she's talking about awareness. What are the three aspects of awareness of the mind? In a way, it's her answer to what is the nature of mind, I guess you could say. And she comes up with these three kind of aspects or three modes: the flashlight, the floodlight, and the juggler, or you could say the CEO, the executive. I know some of you will have watched the interview, so I won't go exhaustively, but for those of you who haven't watched the interview, the flashlight is very much the part of awareness that focuses on a very particular, often actually a very particular area of space or inner space. Yeah, it's very sort of in a way narrowly focused on something an object that's important to us. Yeah. So I mean, in evolutionary terms, you can imagine sort of primitive man or woman kind of focusing on a berry bush to get berries to eat. That's the focus. Like that's what you need right now. The floodlight actually is a much broader awareness. And that's much more kind of alert to what's happening right now, including danger. So to go back to that berry bush, it would be the snap of a twig over there that might be a sort of a threat, a creature. So it's a much broader awareness. Awareness of context. I mean, I did wonder. She wasn't very interested in talking about the hemispheres of the brain, but for those of you who were interested who watched Ian McGilchrist, I did wonder if there was some kind of connection with the left brain being the more focused part and the right brain being more about breadth and context, other people, that sort of thing. Although it seems very hard to talk about these two halves of the brain without getting it wrong. So, and she didn't really want to go there. No, if you saw the interview, she didn't really want to go there. So, and made the point of how often, just in a way, layman's understandings are wrong about the hemisphere. So, yeah. And then the juggler, or the CEO, is the one who is kind of monitoring goals. Trying to say, okay, what's our priority right now? What's our goal right now? So I mean, for those of you who are Buddhists, I thought those first two you could think of as what we call sati. That For those of you who do mindfulness of breathing or breathing meditation, you're definitely focusing on the breath. That's that first attention system. You're focusing on the breath. But you've also got breadth awareness. You've also got awareness of the body and the broader sense of yourself. So you've got focus and breadth. Whereas the juggler or the CEO, that's sort of executive decision making, saying, right now we're going to focus on this, that's more what we call sampajanya, or continuity of purpose. What is the priority right now? When we sit down to meditate on the breath, that's what we're doing. That's our decision. That's what the CEO, the juggler, is saying. That's what we're going to focus on. We're not going to think about that trip, that holiday, whatever. We're going to come back to the breath. So yeah, so those are the three modes of attention that she, that she's delineated, if you like. And we'll come back to it as we start to talk about how awareness can go wrong and how it can go right. But yeah, just to give you the sort of the outlines.
And then the other thing that she talked about was this thing, VUCA. Which
Yes.
sounds like dukkha. For Buddhists, they'll recognise the word, but it's actually VUCA.
Yes.
So I thought let's say a little bit about what she was saying about VUCA,
Yeah.
which I thought was very striking and worth us knowing as an acronym, if that's what it is. Yeah, it is an acronym.
Yeah, so VUCA stands for, apparently again it comes out of this world of first responders, as they call them in America. It's when you've got volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So, of course, people in the sort of first responder world, if you're responding to a car crash or a building on fire or a firefight in Afghanistan, obviously those are very heightened. That's a very heightened experience of VUCA. All four of those, I guess. But actually, her point was that's true for all of us. In all of our lives, we face those kind of scenarios. I mean, she made the point, of course, the last 2 years of COVID lockdowns and the pandemic generally have been a collective experience of VUCA. Of uncertainty, what's going to happen next. Very complex. What am I able to do? How am I going to earn a living? And very, very volatile. And is my life in danger? Or my friend's life in danger? Is my family? So. But also, you could say exposure to 24-hour news, and all the alarms. If like me, you're checking the news on Ukraine every day, that's not going to kind of calm the mind. That's an experience of kind of complexity and ambiguity and uncertainty. What will come next? So, but also just busyness as well. If one's living a very busy life. So. And just the internal, also you can have internal VUCA, if you like, just if you're ruminating a lot on difficulties or kind of speculating about how things could go wrong in your life, that's your sort of internal VUCA, which yes does kind of connect with what we call dukkha or suffering, Buddhist suffering, and there's 3 levels of dukkha, 3 levels of suffering, aren't there, in Buddhism? So yeah, I thought that was very interesting. And she was talking about the effect, the problem of VUCA, and so I'll just say what she was saying about the effect on those 3 attention systems using her model. In those, so basically, it weakens our awareness. It weakens our ability to make good decisions, to be happy, to be emotionally regulated, to be creative. And in the extreme, that flashlight. If you imagine literally a flashlight or a torch in a dark alley, it means it's very uncertain. It's unsteady. It won't just stay in one spot. It keeps moving around if you're in a VUCA situation, or it just gets fixated on one spot.
She was saying that like you could get fixated on a thought, for instance.
Well, yes, in a way that's often how depression is sustained. Is because one just gets fixated on a particular situation. And likewise, the unsteady one might be, the extreme might be a case of ADHD. The floodlight, that would be, when that's going wrong, that would be a kind of state of hypervigilance, like you're just always on alert for what might go wrong next, rather than just a relaxed background sense of the environment. So again, in extreme, that would be, anxiety or even PTSD. And then the floodlight, sorry, I just said that. Then the CEO or the juggler, you just, in that scenario, you just kind of lose touch with your goals. Your actions don't align with your goals anymore, with your intentions. In fact, I've got a story from today, if you want to hear it.
Today?
Yeah, of VUCA in my very minor sort of first world kind of problems kind of way.
Go on then.
Well, I was travelling up here to do the seminar, travelling up to London from Somerset, and I really wanted to power spray the patio before I left.
We've all been there.
We've all been there, right? It's covered in moss, got to get rid of it, right? And so I had to do it today because my partner's getting. I promised I'd do it. She's getting back today. I've got to do it, right? So I get the sprayer out, plugged in, and got the water coming, and I'm spraying the patio with a sense of pressure because I've got a train to catch. So I've got to get this done quickly, and so very focused. So the old flashlights there, right? Literally, kind of on each square of the patio, spraying off the mold. And I'm really focused on that. The CEO is very clear. I've got to do this by my train at 1:55. I've got to get this done. And but something about the sort of stress of that situation, I didn't notice that the hose had come separate from the unit, and so water was actually pouring into the hallway of the house. And I didn't notice that, so my floodlight wasn't really operating because I was just so focused on this thing. So then I turned around and the hallway was kind of a little pond had formed. So anyway, I mean, a very silly example, but I thought a case where, in a way, that pressure of not having enough time to do the job meant basically I'd lost awareness.
Yeah, making bad decisions.
Which actually meant it all took longer, of course, that's sponging out all the water. Anyway, yeah, I mean, that's a minor sort of first world type issue, but maybe it helps illustrate. Anyway, so then of course she talks about what to do about VUCA. I don't know if you want me to go on to that.
Yeah, let's go on to what, because it is rather important what to do about it.
Well, yeah, because it's
let's
universal.
just go through what the acronym stands for again, just in case people didn't get it, because it's volatile, uncertain.
Yeah.
What was it?
Complex
and ambiguous.
Yeah.
I sometimes think, what does the A stand for? Ambiguous.
Ambiguous, yes. Well, yeah, her main point, and I thought this is one of the most interesting things that Amishi was saying, is don't even think about trying to avoid VUCA. Like I say, I mean, interestingly enough, although we talked about this sort of crisis of attention, she wasn't particularly interested in talking about switch off your devices, get off social media. She wasn't actually particularly interested in that, and she certainly wasn't interested in, as I say, sort of give up your job and somehow live in the mountains, which is unrealistic anyway. For most of us, what she's actually saying is that so if VUCA is degrading our awareness, our attention systems, as she says, well, what are we going to do about that? Because the irony is that we need more heightened awareness to deal with VUCA, to deal with difficulty, and yet it's degrading it. So we've got a problem there. So she used the analogy of actually, it's like a fuel tank. Your awareness is like a fuel tank. You've either got a kind of a reserve of awareness, or you haven't. And well, obviously, therefore, the thing to do is to find ways to top up that reserve of awareness, as we would call it, so that you can meet those challenges. So for those of you out there who do meditate daily, good news, because basically in a way her scientific research is saying that is exactly what you need to be doing. And she's, as I say, done all these studies with soldiers and got definitive evidence that people who meditated daily, at least for 5 days a week I think it was, did considerably better in the field, in war zones, or as firefighters, whatever they were doing, did considerably better, made better decisions, they stayed more emotionally buoyant and more creative if they had a daily practice. And in fact, even if they were only meditating for 12 minutes a day, that's the minimum. Isn't it? Yeah. Anything less actually doesn't make any difference. Basically no difference. So she did say more is better. Yeah. She was really clear about that. That doesn't mean just do 12 minutes, but and that's now what they teach the GIs to do, is do 12 minutes a day. Yeah. They realised asked them to do half an hour was stupid because they ended up doing nothing. So they said, no, do the 12 minutes. And some people, of course, they get right into it and do more. So that was the first thing. And interestingly, the practices that she's training these people in are pretty close to what we do for those of you involved in Tirana. Mindfulness of breathing, basically. Loving kindness meditation, what we call Maitreyabandhu. They're the main two practices. There is another one which is the other thing she's suggesting. She talks about meta-awareness, cultivating meta-awareness. And this is basically like a sort of, in a way, awareness aware of itself. So your mind looking at itself, if you like. In a way, it's quite an advanced practice in Buddhism. We talk about Mahamudra or Dzogchen or something, but this is what she's also teaching people to do. So like a sense of what is the state of my mind right now. Really kind of, that's what meant by meta, like looking almost from above, like what is the state of my mind right now? And that's been very effective, for example, in dealing with depression and so forth. And that's something we can do in daily life. Any time in the day we can just kind of just get a sense, hold on, what is the state of my mind right now? Oh, okay, yeah, it's getting a bit tight, a bit stressed, yeah, a bit overwhelmed. So, and the other thing she talks about is decentering, and that's a kind of a disidentification with the mental state that you see. I probably won't talk about that too much. And yeah, her findings were that these kind of practices will strengthen your attention systems, your awareness, so that you're much better able to remain happy and creative and so forth in, well, certainly very extreme situations like that, but obviously for those of us who aren't firefighters or paramedics, likewise.
You're cleaning them.
Even those are some massive challenges like having to clean the patio by lunchtime.
Yeah, great.
Yeah. Although it didn't work, I didn't meditate this morning. Maybe that's what happened. That's what went wrong. Yeah.
And then we're going to show a clip in a minute, just a little bit of a clip from the conversation, and then after that we'll have a bit of a tea break in a minute. But no, we'll have some questions. But on my list here, I've got mind wandering, positive and negative. I've forgotten what we meant by that.
I found this really interesting. This was the highlight for me. In a way, if one's already a meditator, then what I've just talked about is just kind of good news. Oh, great, I'm on the right track. This bit was really interesting. So she talks about mind wandering, which in negative and positive terms. So negatively, this is when we're trying to do a task, like, for example, focusing on the breath, but it could be writing a paper or an important email, and your mind just keeps wandering off the task, and we're all familiar with this. You're not present, maybe getting lost in thought, as I was saying earlier, rumination, catastrophizing. And what she was saying is what you're doing is you're kind of, in that moment, you're kind of overloading what she calls the sort of whiteboard of the mind, the short-term memory of the mind. It's just getting loads of thought, loads of, what we call distraction. The whiteboard of your mind just filling up, really filling up. And it could also be because of VUCA stuff, just getting filled with stimulation and thoughts about that stimulation. But also just through too much activity, just constant activity. If one is just constantly active from morning till night, especially focused on tasks, trying to be really productive, actually that's overloading your sort of whiteboard, and you're actually going to find it harder to focus, harder to concentrate. Your mind's going to wander, as I'm sure you all know from your own experience, and that's going to lead to errors, emotional reactivity. You're obviously you can have less patience with people, less patience with yourself, and this was really quite salutary. You're not going to remember your life.
Yes, you mentioned that, didn't you?
I was really struck by this. That actually memories are formed from that, if you like, that mental whiteboard is where memories are formed from. Or to put it another way, she said attention is the doorway to memory. Memories are encoded from that. And if your whiteboard's, your short-term memory is completely full all the time, there's that gateway. There's no way through that doorway. That doorway, I'm mixing my metaphors. That doorway is kind of blocked. And I found that really interesting. And as I said in the interview, that was certainly my experience from living habitually a very full life from morning till night. Even as a meditator, I have to say, even as a meditator, fine, I meditate first thing in the morning, but then if I'm just full on the rest of the time, then I don't actually have a very good memory of experiences from my life, and that's a very strong pattern. So I was very struck by that.
There's a story, wasn't there? A father with a son. I can't remember what the story was now.
Well, one of the officers from the army who just didn't remember his children, big chunks of his children's childhood, and there were photos, he's there in the photo, but he doesn't remember. And it wasn't that he forgot, somehow they can tell it wasn't that he forgot, he just, because he wasn't present, he didn't make the memory. And what's more, this was the very strong point, is a takeaway for you. If you're not present, you lose it. You can't create the memory later. You have to be present in the moment, otherwise it's lost. And apparently, again, this is all proven with brain science. So I thought that was very interesting. And this is all in the area of negative mind wandering. Basically, that guy's mind was on other stuff. He's there with his children, but he's not really with them because he's worrying about, I don't know, probably army stuff or whatever, work problems. So therefore he's not present, he doesn't remember.
It's quite strong. I was very struck. Yeah. I thought it was very striking that if you're not present, you don't remember things, and how much the experience we all have of so much of one's life sort of flowing away from one.
But there is positive mind wandering, and this is the antidote as well. So there is an antidote, there is hope. I mean, obviously those other things we talked about should help, but the big one she talks about is intentional mind wandering, and this is positive mind wandering where it's intentional. And what she means by this is completely task-free time, where you're not making any demands on those three attention systems. None. You're not trying to focus on anything, you're not trying to achieve anything, you're not trying to be alert to anything, you're just not trying to do anything. And a lot of us would tend, when we want a break, we might sit, what I would do anyway, go and look at the news. Oh, how's Emma Raducanu doing at Wimbledon? That would be my idea of relaxing. That doesn't count, I'm afraid, that's a task. Or looking at social media, that doesn't count, that's a task. It's got to be just completely kind of doing nothing, basically, just letting the mind just wander. You just go for a walk, just look out the window. It's the kind of stuff we all know we should do more of, but she's got scientific proof that is what's needed. That's what lets the whiteboard clear. That this ink that's on the whiteboard does disappear. It does. It's vanishing ink, but you have to give it time. And I mean, the biggest example of this would be, of course, going on retreat. I was on retreat last week, and I was quite disciplined. I didn't read anything. If I had time into meditations, as I did, I just sat around doing nothing. And it's very hard initially, but wow, there's a real recharge of that fuel tank of awareness. And I think I remember it pretty well. I'll do it at this point a week later. But anyway, so I did ask about boredom, because that's the main reason often we don't want to do that kind of thing, or we've just got such a momentum of drive and restlessness that it's just hard to just put the brakes on. And she said, this you see that boredom, take that as a sign to, okay, it's uncomfortable, but just take that as a kind of notification. Okay, I've got a choice though how I respond. I don't have to respond to boredom by just straight back onto the phone. I can just work with this. And it's been talked about in Buddhist circles as boredom being like a dragon that guards treasure, but it's a kind of and that treasure being real depth of mind. So there is treasure to be found, but you do have to, I have to, and maybe you do too, work with that real resistance to just do nothing.
I mean, it is interesting because we've been, in True Acting, we've been teaching the value of doing nothing for ages, but there is something a bit helpful about having a bit of
science
so okay, then you really do need to do nothing. So that is really good. Let's have a look at, we've been talking a lot about the conversation, so let's have a little, let's watch the clip from a clip that Amalavajra chose, and see
This is a whole other area, which I was right at the end I found really fascinating.
Even the brain basis at this point is sort of less central to my work than understanding just if there are benefits and how to benefit people most from this work. There are aspects of what my lab does that's very interested in brain function, but it's really on the level of understanding the nature of how mental states proliferate. So it gets into a little bit of an esoteric sort of Buddhist terrain of the contingent nature of reality. And if one moment in time really sets the stage for the next moment in time, and what happens in moment n+1 is really determined by what just happened a moment ago. How does that look in the brain? And what we realize is the brain too is sort of a contingent organ. And we do this using EEG. So we're not just looking at like, larger time windows. We're looking at these thousands of seconds, something called microstates. And what we see is that microstates actually have this sort of contingent nature. So I'm very interested in that aspect of it, but it has to do more with mind wandering and attention, more so than its hemispheric nature.
And that's really piqued my interest. What you just said about this contingent reality of the brain. What do you see a difference in the brains of people who are really, well, either very experienced meditators, or even, I don't know how you would measure wisdom, but people who've attained quite deep wisdom or insight into the contingent nature of reality, you could say. Goodness knows how you would measure that, but is there anything that you can sort of see objectively through an ECG or a brain scan?
Yeah, I would say I'm now commenting on the broader field of contemplative neuroscience. And yes, we are learning a lot about this. What we know, for example, is that it's not so much about this contingent state that has happened very little, but just to say in broad strokes, yes, long-term practitioners have particular nodes in their brain that have increased what's called cortical thickness. You can almost think about it as like certain muscle groups are stronger because they're working them out. That's the way of thinking about it. We know that interconnection between certain brain networks is better. The dynamics are smoother. And, we talked about mind wandering. We know what the brain network that really is involved in mind wandering, or this internally directed attention. And with long-term and even short-term practice, you can see that activation in that network, something called the default mode network, which is actually multiple subnetworks, it can get dialed down. So we see things are making sense. Like the thing that's part of the training is showing up in the way that the brain looks. This question that I'm talking about really is not even about contemplative training. It's about just the nature of how the brain operates. So if you know that there's a particular microstate, configuration of neurons that are showing you, there's stability, almost a mind moment, if you will. And that mind moment by mind moment configuration has a temporal contingency. It's likely to be the same. And so if you're in state 1 in these microstates, you're likely to be in state 1 in the next moment. And the chances of you flipping to a different state are lower than you staying in the same state, and flipping to certain specific states is even lower. So like to go from a very focused state to a completely open state, very unlikely. So you might go from focused to a little less focused, but going from focused to totally unconstrained, very unlikely. So this is how I think it actually relates to some very interesting Buddhist concepts of even what it means to have long-term practice in terms of your tethering to mental contingency. So, for example, if you think about what, I'm now totally speculating, but if you think about what enlightenment is, to be truly free, what does that look like in terms of a brain configuration? One hypothesis may be you don't need to have those contingencies. You can go from state highly focused to totally not focused. You can go to any dimension with ease and without that kind of compulsion to be tied into what's going on. Now, we don't know, but it would be interesting to see even how contemplative practice, long-term or short-term, impacts the contingencies between these microstates as a way to understand more fundamentally how practicing frees us in some sense.
Yes, but let's say a little bit about that and then just see whether there's any questions, and then we'll break. And what struck you about that? Why did you choose that?
Well, it's funny, it's classic. I just felt towards that end of the conversation, she obviously really wanted to talk about enlightenment. And it was fascinating, the idea of scanning the brain of a Buddha or somebody near enlightenment, and just being able to see that in a brain scanner, to see that sort of, as she says, non-contingent nature. I mean, we talk about conditioned arising, don't we? That phenomena arise out of other conditions, and that matches what she's saying about the brain. The brain you don't just suddenly find yourself in a particular mental state. It arises out of conditions, and that can actually be seen on a scanner, which is fascinating. And a Buddha's brain, which is unconditioned by, say, greed, hatred, and delusion. How interesting that if you can actually see that on a scanner. I mean, I suppose, let's say even if you could, so what? But I guess maybe if that could start to, what would be the benefit of that? I suppose if you could start to sort of I don't know, see what kind of practices help you towards that state. Maybe you could try different meditations whilst having the scanner and see what kind of meditations are freeing the mind. I don't know.
There would be an extreme example of how mental states actually create mind, literally.
Oh,
You just end up
yes.
actually you rewire your brain that you.
Yes.
So it's not just the brain creates consciousness, but creates. That's another question, but the consciousness.
Oh, the consciousness creates
actually
brain.
creates the brain.
Yes,
the
yeah,
shape
yeah.
of the brain itself.
Yeah.
You know.
Which actually she said, didn't she, when she was talking about long-term meditators?
Yeah.
That's I mean, that's well attested to,
So
isn't it?
It actually changes your brain.
Yeah.
Which is.
That's interesting. Isn't it?
That's interesting. So let's see. Let's see if anyone's got any questions about either you might have watched Amishi's the conversation with Amishi or just what Amalavajra has been saying just now. Let's just see if there's any questions. Perhaps either type them into YouTube, not YouTube, into Zoom, or we could, or put your hand up and we can unmute you. It'd be nice to hear a few of the voices. We won't spend a lot of time with questions because I want to, in the second half after our break, I want to do a bit of a review of the whole of the Nature of Mind project because we can start to look back now at what the highlights have been. But let's just see what there's any questions here. So you can put your hand up or you put them in the text. Does anyone, we've got a crew here who are looking for your questions. You may or may not have them.
Yeah, we've got one here.
Yes, I've got a question about the positive and negative mind wandering.
Oh, yes.
Which I found very intriguing.
Mm.
And my recollection of what she was saying is that the main difference was the extent to which we were on task or not.
Yeah.
So it's negative if we have a task that we're not, as it were, following.
Yeah.
And it's positive if we don't have a task. Which I found that, it's a very pragmatic distinction, isn't it?
Yeah.
And what's the question? I suppose I'm less convinced that there's such a difference in quality, or maybe that's the question. Is there a difference in quality between positive and negative mind wandering? Or it feels to me like there's... Is there another distinction between, as it were, reactive and creative mind wandering?
Oh, that's interesting. Yes. Yeah, I mean, so you're quoting Sangharashta's distinction between reactive and creative. Yeah, I mean, I think that would be a perfectly good way of making the distinction. I guess in the first case, what she's calling negative mind wandering, then in a way, you've got a task you're trying to do, and you're kind of reacting to it. There's part of you doesn't want to do it. You're bouncing off it. I mean, I think even slightly had that on the train today, preparing for tonight, like, checking the tennis. So I'm familiar with that kind of slightly reactive and slightly unconscious response. Whereas, the more creative mind wandering, I guess, would be much more intentional, much more conscious, where you're saying, actually, and this is what I did on the train, actually, I just need a bit of a break, actually. I think I'm taking this as a sign that I need to take a break from preparing for this interview and just look out the train window for a while, look at the countryside, and this you kind of laugh, but I even have a timer on my watch or on my phone. I just set it. My current number is 12 minutes, and I say, right, I'm really strict. I'm not going to look at my phone. I'm not going to try and work for the next 12 minutes. I'm just going to sit and look around the train carriage, look out the window, and just bear the boredom. Usually comes in about 8 minutes, and just do it. So I think that is a decent framing of it. I think there is a qualitative difference in a way. There's definitely, I say, one is fairly unconscious, just kind of flipping, and the other one is much more conscious and like, no, I'm gonna face this. I'm gonna actually do something on my initiative to try and face this mental state I'm in.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because in Buddhism, propuncture, which is mind wandering, really, is always negative. I think.
Right.
I don't think there's any conception of it being positive.
Yeah.
One of the epithets of the Buddha is nispropunction, no propunction. So he seems not to have, to go back to the Buddha's brain, that kind of highly accepting. propuncture is a bit like, it's sort of like rumination, which is sort of driven associative thinking. He doesn't seem to have had driven associative thinking. Because there must be a positive version of it, though, because partly it's my own experience of trying to write a poem, for instance. You are trying to sort of let your mind wander, but you're trying to, it's a bit more, there's an English word for it,
reverie.
a reverie.
Yeah.
You're trying to, there's a way in which the wandering mind at best is connect, because propuncture connects the past with the present, the future with this thing with that thing.
Yeah.
But there does seem to be a sort of positive version of it, which we used to call reverie, where this apparently not connected things are shown to be connected. Yeah. And that's certainly, in my experience of writing at times, even what appears to be a distraction, or even just looking out the window, suddenly what you see, I had a moment the other day where I was writing something and looked out the train window, something I see was immediately in the poem and seemed to be needed in it. So,
yeah.
I mean, I'm not sure what the Buddha would think of that, so you should write poems. It does make me wonder if there's a kind of a positive associative thinking that is actually a different way of thought, where you're bringing apparently disparate things together into actually a thought.
But without having to think about it.
But without having to think about it. So you're not trying to think, what am I trying to think?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
You're being led by association.
Yeah.
I mean, metaphor is an association. Yeah. Anyway, I don't know what I think about it, but that was my thought on that. There seems to be a sort of positive version of propuncture, but I can't think of an example in the Pali that suggests that. It seems to always think of it as negative.
Well, we do have the practice of just sitting, and that's recommended, isn't it? Yes, you do a period of focused practice on the breath or on loving kindness, and then you have a period of just sitting, where certainly our teacher Sangha actually says, well, you just sit. You don't try and do anything, you just sit.
He's very strict about not giving any teaching on it.
Yeah.
But let's see if there's any. Thanks very much for that. Let's see if there's any other questions, and then one other thing before our tea break. And did you say it's a reason why? I can't.
No,
remember.
it was in another interview that I listened to on in a podcast actually, and it come up in the context of. I think the guy was asking about masculinity actually. I think the podcast guy was saying, well, it's hard to imagine these soldiers, mainly men, being interested in meditation, really? And she said, yes, not only are they well into the meditation, they particularly love the loving kindness practice. So there you go. But no, she didn't hazard a guess as to why that would be, I'm afraid, that I remember. In terms of this other question, maybe we need to list out the 5 hindrances for those who don't know them. You're going to ask me to do that, are you?
You told me not to say very much.
No, I didn't say that. I just wanted to get a word in, actually. You've hardly said anything.
I know, I'm a tiller.
Come on, people want to hear from you as well.
Tell us about it.
Well, restlessness, anxiety, sense desire, sloth and torpor, ill will, and doubt. Thank you. Doubt and indecision, is it? Doubt and indecision. Yeah. So your question, Robert, is there an equivalent somehow between those 5? I don't know. I don't think. I think she's talking more about. I mean, she was talking about internal mental states. It's true. She wasn't. She said she was very clear. It's not just the world. It's not just the firefight or the emergency in the hospital. It can be internal as well. So maybe there's some crossover there, or at least on the internal side. Like what's our response to life? Yeah, actually, yes. So what's our response to life? We might just get very restless and anxious. We're in the pandemic. We're in the pandemic. Okay, just getting into a state of restlessness and anxiety, finding it hard to just sit still, worrying about the future. Yeah, fair enough. That would be internal VUCA, actually. Now I think about it. Yeah.
I think there is a correlation.
Yeah, you're right. Actually. Yeah.
So listen, let's we need to move on. I think we need to have a cup of tea in a minute, according to my timing. So